there, welcome back to another episode. Today I'm going to talk about Privilege, which is the Peter Watkins film. As you can see, it's a BFI. This is one of the BFI flipside editions, which is what it means is the BFI released all these films in the British film industry that were barely released or were given very limited releases of these films. They're very culty, or not even culty, some of them were just forgotten about. So they released certain films that were from bigger directors, like Richard Lester did The Bed Sitting Room, which was released. We get this one, Peter Watkins, who's a more famous director, but a lot of them were much smaller films with people you might not have heard of. So I've got quite a few of them. I'll need to do more reviews of some of these films because there's a lot of really good stuff in there. But Privilege is one I'd seen already. I'd seen this before the BFI came out. Now the BFI print looks gorgeous. I mean, it looks really nice. Like, far better than you'd expect from a film that was barely seen, but maybe because the film wasn't seen that much, the print may not have gone through tons and tons of wear and tear, because it looks absolutely gorgeous. Now, the film was made after Peter Watkins had done the Culloden in the War Games, so this was his film after that, after the controversies, but it was still a low-budget film, and it was barely released. It didn't do very well at all. Insulted this audience, and nobody went to see it. And Watkins, it was the start of Watkins having to struggle to make more films. I mean, he made Punishment Park after this, but generally he's had a much more of a hard time of it making films. Now, this was probably the best chance of actually getting a proper release of, because it's about the pop industry. And it stars Paul Jones, who was a pop star at the time, as well as Jean Shrimpton, who was a model. These are not actors who were cast for their acting skills, but they're perfectly fine in the film. It's one of those things that's like, it's a well cast film, because people have been cast to be either character actors who are in the background playing supporting parts, or the two main characters who are playing characters who are already limited just by their experience. So I don't think Watkins was looking for people who could develop a full character. I think he was looking for people who were a bit vague and a bit hard to pin down. And so, because the whole point is, you can put a lot into some certain people. So what you invest in characters is part of the point of the film. Now, the film itself is about a pop star called Steve. Steve something or other. His second name starts with an S. And of course his initials are SS. Just so you know, it's been subtle. But people wasn't as subtle though, but you can't help but notice that it's all about a pop star with the title was SS. Because of other signs of that later. Right. What happens is he's this huge singer that's touring America, he's touring Britain, he's got a key to the city, he's the guy that everybody wants to be. He's like the Beatles all in one person, really. But of course, his management's writing the songs for him. He doesn't write the songs, he just sings them. He's got a kind of messiah complex thing going on with the public where they like to see him in chains, they see him chained and beaten up by the police. And this is a coalition government, and the subtle sign put through the Times is, yes, a metaphor for Britain. This is Britain in the near future. But it's a metaphor for any kind of state that has had a turbulent past, who does want its citizens to behave. I mean, it's kind of like Punishment Park in that way. It's like, even though it's saying specifically at one time, one place, the influences can range to almost any culture ultimately, because it's about stuff beyond what the surface area theme is. Basically, you're watching this guy be manipulated and have this kind of rise to be one of the most famous people on the planet, and just coming from nowhere. He was actually in jail before he became a singer for something. We never find out what he did, but it gives him a martyr complex to the public that they present their fantasies of who he is and what he is, which his own management team take advantage of, because there's a Steve Enterprises thing run by all these management people who are very British, very upper class, and they're always in it for the money and the power. So they're obviously using this poor guy just to get most of the money, probably didn't get that much money from this, and to just show power and use his fame to manipulate everybody. Because he's surrounded by people, so there's so many people to pay off whenever he does anything. So he's always surrounded with people. He's never quite himself. He doesn't even know who he is really, and that's one of the themes of the film. But the idea is that the actual the country is in this coalition, which they say is a sign that the left and the right don't disagree in any real policy. Which, really, when do the political sides of the left and the right ever disagree that much? I mean, Labour and Conservatives, I mean, come on, they're kind of there's a lot of similarities between them. I mean, Labour's going towards the right and the Tories have gone towards the left, and nowadays there is a kind of coalition. There's been a coalition with the Lib Dems and the Tories before. It's not out of the ordinary here. But if you ever lived through a coalition, you know basically what that means is no one trusts anybody in government that much. No one jumps out at him as being something that's that impressive. But of course they have to try and manipulate the situation to make it look positive rather than a failure of power, a failure of direction. And you're watching Britain being this society that has lost a lot of its power but still trying to get itself back up into power using whatever means necessary. And it shows a lot of old-fashioned techniques, and it still believes in manipulating its own people, and it's a fairly seedy place that's not quite given up its power base yet, but it's trying not to, but it's failing. Because a lot of people who are going up in power now are just kind of mediocre talents, which hasn't changed much since this film was made. This film was made in the late 60s, and it could have been made now, really. So, the idea of the film's shot as a documentary, like a lot of Watkins films is, and it's about them following the singer Steve as he goes through a change where basically his image is going from being that of someone who's been beaten up a lot for his fans. Basically, his fans like seeing him beaten up by the police as a way they can emote through him, to being someone who's more of a Christian and who's more of a person who is going to show who's going to be a conformist figure for the country. That's what they want from him. They want him to conform the country because he's such an influence. And what the film is about is like what makes people conform, what makes people fall into things that is not good for them. And you see it from every point of view. Because you see it from the point of view of the fans, and the fans have a very emotional view of Steve. They view him as this kind of Christ figure who's suffering for their sins. The way, and there's a lot of young women who are big fans of him, the way they're fans of the Beatles or the Rolling Stones or whatever, they're fans, they're huge fanboys of him and his style and what he's bringing to it. And because they can emote through him, through his suffering, and they're the ones who want to redeem him in some way, they adore him. The guys, no one quite knows why they like him, but they say he's relatable because he's suffering, apparently. And because the country's suffering, he seems to be a figure they can link to. Now, there's a big implication that the country's gone through a big traumatic area in the past. Like, is why they're so focused on reforming. Like, there's been too much. Like, there may have been wars or whatever. You just never quite told. But there's a suggestion that things have gone bad and the government wants everyone to conform now and just be more traditional. It might not have been a war, it might have just been scared by the flower power generation. They're just scared of what's coming. They're scared of a new generation that's very questioning. So they're using Steve and they're using music or arts as a way to control the population rather than to embrace questioning. That's something governments do all the time. I mean, governments are notorious for always trying to support anything which will be unquestioned. They do not want you to think. That's just governments for you. I mean, it's not even controversial anymore. It's like, yeah, that's what they do. It's just normal behaviour for them. Because if you think, you can look into what they're saying and say, well, that's always nonsense. So, the film is about what drives us and what makes those images and emotions that we need to get on with our lives, and how are they manipulated by forces, and why are they, and who are the people manipulating. That's kind of what it's about. Because it can be anything, really. I mean, Steve becomes a big star because people are his bad background and his need for redemption within the public, within this image of someone who's been sold to the public, has hit a nerve. People just love that. They just adore that. As long as they don't find out that much about him, they're fine. As long as he's an image to them. The way an actor's an image to you. Like, the biggest thing, the worst thing an actor can do is actually show you the real personality. Because then people are like, well, we don't like you anymore. Because people want to have some mystery about the person who's in the arts or who's in the entertainment. Generally. I mean, unless you're an addict who needs to know everything. But a lot of people just want to know the image that you're presenting to them. And this is saying, any image can be there, and you will fall for it, because narrative needs song narratives, film narratives, any kind of narrative that ties to what you're needing, you will inflate beyond what it actually is. And if anyone can find a narrative that's particular for that time and then exploit it, they can do real damage to it. And you can see that throughout. I mean, the arts are full of that, really. Like, people with very dodgy they use their talents to hide some dodgy stuff going on in themselves or whatever. It's just life. And also, it shows basically the need of people, that they do need this. It's like, it's a flaw in humanity. Humanity likes this, likes these narratives. The great masses fall for this all the time, and it's like, well, what do you do with that? Well, if you're decent, you would try and avoid exploiting that obvious defect. But if you're a manipulator, you want to exploit it. And the manipulators always have the best thing in mind. They're always saying, like, history has shown us that these people are manipulated. Like, we don't need to give them education to get them out of this habit. We need to manipulate them in the proper way. When in fact, education is the way out of it. Education is the way out of it. But they just throw it away as if, say, this is liberal nonsense. Which it is not. It is the way out of it. I mean, we've got instincts that we do have to intellectualise our way through and actually think through. We can't just go by our emotions. And because this government's so corrupt, it's targeting the younger people to get them in when they're young, when they're impressionable, when they have this image of something to like a pop star. It's like, get them in now, get them conforming now, and they won't go into any trouble in the future. That's what they're doing. Because they want to go back to our earlier period, really, of conformity, via the church, or via manners or something, or any kind of conformity of habit we've had in the past. Like, because, I mean, we used to have the Victorian era morals that kept a lot of people in line and made them not look into, like, child slavery or actual slavery of Africans, you know, things like that. Although, actually, the kind of slavery actually was starting to go out as the Victorian era came in, but, you know what I mean, the manners of British life kept a lot of things under wraps that should have been investigated decades before. And it's the same about any society. Any society has that. You've just got that in human nature. And that's a new thing, the pop sensation. So they're trying to use that to actually manipulate people and say, okay, here's what we use to get people back inside, give them not question. We use this poor sap who's a singer, and we make him. We use the fact that he's suffering, because he's obviously suffering some problems, which they do not diagnose. They just exploit and just torture him on stage and let him sing a song, and people just fall for it. They just use that as the impetus for the way to actually control people. And obviously, Peter Watkins using the Christ symbol. I mean, what is a Christ story but someone who suffered through life, and his suffering meant to redeem us? And how many billions of people have fallen for that? So you say, oh, it's a simplistic story, it never happened. Look how many times people fall for crazy stuff in pop stars and don't question. Christianity, again, any kind of religion, a lot of times there's imagery that connects to that religion in a way that makes you emotional rather than actually question the logic of it. It's just what's the part of that story we can exploit. I mean, looking at the rise of any religion, a lot of it is exploiting what's there in the story to create something that ties to bind you really to conformity, whether it be through fear or through a suggestion of like an afterlife or something. Or in this case, it's like conform for this, feel for this, then conform even more through the church and there's an afterlife. But you have to be a good boy or a good girl. And as the film goes on, it shows you going from using him to tying him to religion and try and make religion look a bit more hip, and how pop stars and religions are trying to connect up together to try and create a sense of cohesion that would get people in. And it's all very kind of dubious. But it's just the way life is, it's just the way people act. I mean, there's always something that people are going to use and power are going to use, the politicians will try and use to get people under their control. Politicians are immoral. What do you expect me to do? We can't say they're moral, but they're not. Any time you see them act and you see what's really going on, these are power-hungry sods. These are sociopaths a lot of the time. And this film is just about that sense of, okay, what are they going to use? And it's a wonderful film because it just shows you the damage it's done to the question nature that you need for healthy society to move on. But also targets the people who would much rather just follow their emotions and not get the education and not question what they're doing and what they're following. They'd rather just go for the money. It's like, oh, there's the money and actually not question stuff. Okay, I'll go that direction. Which is something humanity does en masse. I mean, most people do that. Don't try and let yourself fool yourself about people being above that. Most of us are not. So there's a lot of that there. There's also the idea of these younger people who are following their emotions and it's trapping them because they're getting fed lies about this pop star, and then they're getting fed lies about what he represents and what it means to them. And it's leading them through a line of thinking that will lead them to just be conformists. And it's like, it's almost they'll will themselves on. And it's kind of like the way people go from being like rebels, because the government in this film are terrified of the youth becoming rebellious and becoming like flower children and things and into drugs and thinking too much. So it's about the way people conform. Like they start off feeling rebellious, or I'm not going to follow my parents, and then they'll just fall for an image of something that feels rebellious, but it's actually getting sold to them by an organisation that's a machinery, which is capitalism. It's just sounding back their image, the preferred image of their own godhood or their own salvation back to them for money, and then it creates a trap for them that they keep on falling down, and creates these lies that they fall into. Well, this is how society works, so there's not questioning. You basically replace thought and education with habit and derangement, basically. Like, you're following lies, and at least some other lies, you don't have a base for your own truth. Because you're basically basing everything on imagery and emotions and what that meant to you, and that's what you're hanging on to, rather than, is that real? Because a lot of it's not real. And it's the same if you're a film fan or a music fan or whatever, a lot of stuff you hang on to is just been manipulating you. That's it. And I'm just as guilty as anyone else for this. I try not to be, but I am. We all are. We all get caught out. So there's that. That's the kind of theme of the film. It's like how it's more complicated, how humanity hasn't got out of any of these bad habits, and it's going to take us probably centuries to get out of it, because everyone wants to make a living, and the best way to make a living is to actually conform. which means it's much harder to turn the ideas around. It makes it much easier for people with worse instincts to actually control the system of information, and it means you dilute education so that the masses aren't educated enough to question. So you get nationalism, so you get, false patriotism, so you get religion as the be-all and end-all of how you make decisions, which is not a healthy thing. Because this is a lefty film. It really is a lefty film. It's about how do we have a healthy society and what are the things holding us back. It does feel very lefty, because I think Peter Watkins is a lefty director. But it's not like saying, oh, the left are great either, because it shows you the left are just as much scumbags as the right. They're all in it. The anarchist is a total sellout. The guy who's meant to be represent the progressive weird side of humanity is a total sellout. Watkins is as cynical in this film as De Palma's in Phantom of Paradise about the music industry. So you've got all that elements to it, and it's just like, well, how do you become a healthy society? And it just shows you it's very difficult to get out, because this is a fascist society ultimately, and it's more or less saying it's quietly fascist, it's polite fascist. It's like we turn off what we don't want to hear, which is what Britain does. Britain's like that. If you don't want to hear something, they'll just turn off quietly, and you don't hear from that person again. We didn't hurt them, we just don't hear from them because they're a problem. That's Britain for you. And that's what happens to this guy. He, he makes one speech where he hates everybody, and look what you've done to me. Which is self-pitying, because, he had plenty of chances throughout the film to step back and say, no, I'm not doing this. We have to try and find another way. He victimised himself by not having the instincts to fight back. But then again, he's been educated to be submissive to them, to be submissive to people with higher knowledge, to be submissive to people who seemingly know better. So he's a victim of his own education or lack of education. And his girlfriend, who's the artist, who you'd think would be much more cynical with stuff, is just a numb character who can say a couple of things like, yeah, you shouldn't be doing this. But she doesn't really know what she's about either. And a lot of it is about how humanity doesn't know what it's about. Even if people are saying about how we control society, they're just scared. They don't know how to control it either. They're controlling this guy who they don't really know how to control because he's an individual, ultimately. And they don't know. They know enough to know what the forces are they can manipulate to get ahead. But they don't understand those forces either. They're just trying to take what they know and try and do their best. But it's out of their control too. They're just taking the little bits of knowledge they have and just exploiting it in a very capitalistic way to make money. That's all they're doing. So even the smart people aren't that smart. And that's basic humanity. Humanity is like, with all these smart people working out, it's like, no, really. Well, even the smart ones look a bit dumb at times, or modern at times. So it's a film about humanity and how humanity is deluding itself and torturing itself and being judgmental on itself because they don't want to think. It's a bit. So it's almost like a conspiracy movie, but the conspiracy is humanity does not want to think. We just want ideas that we can commodify and simplify and not look into it all, because it's like the emotion of the idea is enough to keep us going. Here's another emotion of an idea. It'll keep us going further as well. Here's another emotion. And that'll be the next fad, as long as you don't look into it too much. And that's the kind of darker side of this film, is like the need to not look into stuff in any real detail. That's the sin of the film. That's the film seems to see the sin of humanity, which I agree with. It is a sin of humanity. And we always either blame the rich for funding schools and things, which they do, or the rich blame the poor for not being interested, which a lot of them aren't. But you can also say that a lot of stuff you're taught in schools is so vague. You know, nothing's very little is aimed at the skills of the knowledge of the person, trying to be more proactive and engaging with people to try and use them to the best of their ability to educate them. Because the education system is kind of a mess. You know, so it's like there's a lot of issues that are just passed over because no one wants to pay attention, no one wants to do anything with the hard work. And this film kind of showed you why, because people just want an easy way out. From rich to poor, they want an easy way out, they don't want to think too much. So, that's kind of privilege. We're all kind of privileged in our own way. We've all got our own sense of privilege. At the end of it, the guy destroys himself by actually turning out saying much he hates people, and he ends up, it turns out, he's censored and you can't hear his voice ever again in this society. From the music to his voice, you only see an image of him, which tells you it's a fascist society. He just doesn't want to admit it. And all for the thing of him saying, I hate you all, that's it. It shows you it's so fragile as well. Don't let anyone tell us anything we don't want to hear because we're too scared. Doesn't that sound like today? Again, because no one can actually take scary ideas and how difficult ideas can be and how complicated ideas can be. It's just a fear of that. So that's what the film's about. It's about a privileged society that's not aware of itself and it's not open to criticism or open to how ideas work. It's about how fearful ideas can be, which is what happens in a lot of societies as they get richer. It's like the hunters are gone, the idea hunters are gone that have made everything rich, and the people left over are about a little bit scared because they don't quite know how everything works, and they get more and more scared, and the societies slowly fall away, and you get less and less interest and less inventive, and the society eventually fails because the mediocrity rise and stop the interest in people from rising in any society. It's just the way human beings are. We're useless a lot of the time. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I haven't insulted humanity too much, but I probably have. But I'll be back soon with another one, so I'll see you later. Right, bye for now.